Here it is, guys. After a couple embargo delays, the Phanteks Evolv X2 is finally out. It's got a lot of tempered glass on 3 sides. It is pretty tall and basically floating. Now, this thing looks nothing like the past Evolv cases like the X or the Shift XT. There is a mix of aesthetics to it, and it's primarily designed for very basic configs like air cooling and AIOs. Not a whole lot of room for custom loops. Also, huge shout out to Phanteks, Bitspower, and Titan Rig for providing the hardware in this video. So here's my review, let's talk about it. So it does come in 2 colors, black and white, with the price tag at $149 for the black and $159 for the white. I have the white one here, it's got silver accents to it. The X2 is designed as a showpiece case in mind, which explains the glass panel view on 3 sides. It does have a small footprint of a compact ATX case or mid-tower. It certainly feels that way when holding it. The height, however, is just as tall as the full tower NV7. When I said this case has a mix of aesthetics, I was referring to the visible curved aluminum shroud on the top and bottom of the case behind the glass panels that have defined vertices. I/O ports are placed at the bottom here, which includes your audio jack, 2 USB-A 3.0 and USB-C 3.2 Gen 2. Power and reset buttons are on the top panel though. Here are some scenarios. Buttons and ports placement is a 50-50 when it comes to convenience. Case on the desk would allow easier plug and play on the I/O ports, but less ideal if it is on the floor as you'll have to reach all the way down. But tower on the floor would be convenient for pressing your power and reset buttons on top. If your case is on top of your desk, it is a bit of reach on top for the buttons, but I think most people would power on their system as they are walking to their desk before sitting down anyway, so I think this placement is fine. Now, with the X2 being a display case design in mind, that means no ventilation front or side panel for fans and radiators. All the intake air will enter the bottom panel and exhaust out the top panel. This is where the pillars at the bottom giving the case that floating effect makes sense, as it does provide plenty of space for airflow. When it comes to opening up the case, the top panel will have to come off first by just lifting the back end. It's also got this L-shaped angled ventilation where the airflow is directed to the back and right side of the case. An RGB strip along the right side which is powered on via these 3 pins on the case itself, and a fine mesh dust filter underneath. Each of the 2 long side glass panels are secured via a single screw on top here. Then you just pull it off from the top edge as it hinges, being anchored at the bottom. In order to pull the front glass panel off, you first have to open the back door panel on the right side, pull out that bottom back plastic cover here so you can get access to the 2 screws that hold the front glass panel in place, one at the bottom and one at the top. Then you can simply just tug and slide that glass panel off. Rear back panel for your 120mm fan mount also has directional vents that shoot your airflow out towards the right side of the case, similar to the top panel's L-shaped design. There are a couple of Velcro straps here to tie your cable straight down from the back for a cleaner look as well. Additionally, there is a vanity cover for your PCIe slots to hide the PCIe screws as well. The mid plate itself is a removable tray for 3 120mm fans to be installed. The tray is secured via 1 thumb screw in the back of the case here. Side note, the tray only has enough space to fit 3 fans exactly, and you will not be able to mount a 360 rad on here whatsoever since they will be larger with their in and out ports. The top panel fan tray, however, is a bit larger and you can remove it via this 1 thumb screw in the back, and it is able to fit a 360 rad up to 415mm long, 130mm wide, and 38mm thick. And when doing so, the top panel bracket is supposed to be sandwiched between the radiator and the fans being at the bottom that is, before installing back into the case. If you're doing custom water cooling, I recommend having the hard tubes coming out of the front end, as you won't really have any space to access your fittings in the back unless you're doing soft tubing, which will be less challenging. AIO liquid coolers, however, can have tubes come through the front or the back depending on the design of your cooler. What I mean here is that let's take for example the Phanteks X2 AIO cooler. It's got a refill port that will only fit on the back end of the bracket since it's got a larger cutout, as trying to mount it with tubes on the front will not align with the screw holes of the radiator because it will conflict. However, if you have an AIO that does not have a refill port like this, then you can run the tubes down the front. Now, personally, I don't think this is the most attractive tube run for an AIO build, but with this specific AIO, This was the only orientation I could do, and the tubes had to bend this way. Phanteks did design this X2 AIO to match the style of the X2 case, which is why I used it. There is an adjustable GPU anti-sag bracket here, which is secured by a couple screws in the back with 4 screw positions for a wider range of height. Motherboard tray supports back connect motherboards as well as eATX boards up to 280mm in width. GPU clearance goes up to 380mm in length and 175mm in width up to the glass panel from the motherboard. CPU cooler clearance gives you up to 170mm in height up to the glass panel, which would easily include something like the big Noctua NHP1. Backside has all your cable management with some predetermined routing pathways and Velcro straps along with a removable SSD drive tray that is secured via one thumb screw. PSU chamber provides up to 250mm of clearance for your power supply and cables with a removable hard drive tray that is also secured via one thumb screw. With the combination of the drive cage and tray, you can store up to 5 2.5-inch SSDs, 3 on the tray and 2 on top of the cage. As for 3.5-inch hard drives, you can mount up to 2. At the very bottom, you do also get a full-length fine mesh dust filter for all your air intake. And if you don't know, brushed aluminum here is an absolute dead skin and fingerprint magnet, so you'll want to keep an eye out for wiping. So the X2 here was made for air cooling and AIOs. Not a lot of space to mount your radiators and pump rest units, which makes custom loops a bit challenging. But this is Hardline Nexus, so we only have one option, and that is hard mode. Here is my final build with a 9800 X3D with an RTX 4090 Fe, along with other parts listed on the screen and down in the description. I was able to fit a slim 360 rad up top and a slim 240 on the side here with a sandwich mount stacked with a couple fans and Bitspower's CR240 flat pump res unit. In order to achieve this, I just created a very simple L-shaped bracket that mounts onto the 120 fan at the bottom, which now gives me access to a side radiator mount as shown. The bracket is fabricated from 12-gauge raw steel, so it is plenty strong to hold up this sandwich mount. Now you might be wondering, don't you need ventilation on that side panel for that side radiator since the X2 is a 3-sided glass panel? Actually, I don't, because the 3 intake fans are pulling enough fresh air straight out of that bottom panel, which flows past the extracted heat on that 240 rad and throws everything straight out the top. And there is enough space between that side rad and the glass panels, so the air occupying that space is sufficient. Now, I personally have the 2 fans on that 240 rad as reverse D30s, so they are pulling air towards that reservoir. But I think if I went with the regular D30s pushing air towards the backside panel, it wouldn't make much of a difference. Here are my thermals for this custom loop, running Cinebench and 3D Mark TimeSpy Extreme for temperatures. Feel free to pause the video if you want, but a high-end GPU like this 4090 and 9800 X3D runs just fine on 2 slim rads. The CPU barely touches 72C average on Cinebench's 30-minute stability test, and the GPU stays under 55C on TimeSpy Extreme stress test. And to be honest, although untested, I'm pretty confident that this can run a 14900 and 4090 as well in the same loop, because these 2 rads are plenty for most applications, as most applications will typically be just CPU or GPU intensive, hardly both blasting at the same time. One more thing about my custom bracket mod here is the placement for it ended up being too close to the motherboard, which meant I had to use thin flexible PSU cables like from the default Asus Tough Gaming PSU. As you can see, the 24-pin was especially crammed. Originally, I did want to use my nicer custom cable mod cables, but those are a bit stiffer. I will say that there is even enough room for me to make that adjustment to scoot that bracket closer to that front glass panel, but I just didn't have enough time to remake, redesign, and reorder that piece for this video. But anyways, I think the X2 could use some minor tweaks, like having that upper radiator tray do tubing on both back and front side for all AIO cooler models. Maybe a built-in vertical GPU bracket could be nice, but not super important. Now, even though I'm a custom loop enthusiast, I'm not going to dock points on the X2 for not being able to accommodate custom loops as well by default or without mods, because they just weren't aiming to do that in the first place. And I think it's fine, but not one of Phanteks' best work in my opinion, but it certainly is not bad. It looks good. I think it introduces some new vanity features that I have not seen them do in the past. The price is fair, but it could also be better with the two minor changes I mentioned earlier. Overall, I think the X2, I get the feeling it's a stepping stone to something greater in the future.